A very good evening to all our friends and welcome to the Hindu News analysis of Shankar IAS Academy for the date 21st February 2021. The list of the relevant news articles taken up for today's discussion from 5 different editions of the Hindu newspaper along with their page numbers are given here for your reference. Also the handwritten notes in the PDF format and timestampings for all the news articles taken up for today's discussion is given in the description box and also in the comment section for the best interest of the viewers. Let us now begin with our first news article. See, this FAQ article is about the disinvestment policy of the Government of India, which was announced in the budget 2021-22. So in this discussion, let us focus on the features of the policy, the significance of the move, and the risks associated with it. The syllabus relevant for this analysis is highlighted here for your reference. Please go through it. First, let us see what is the policy. See, in the budget, the government announced a policy of strategic disinvestment of public sector enterprises. This policy provides a clear roadmap for disinvestment in all non-strategic sectors and strategic sectors. So for this purpose, the government has identified 4 areas as strategic, and they are atomic energy, space and defense, then transport and telecommunications, then power, petroleum, coal and other minerals, and finally banking, insurance and financial services. Now let us see the objectives of this policy. First, minimizing the presence of the central government PSCs including financial institutions and also creating a new investment space for private sector. Second, post or after the disinvestment, the economic growth of central public sector enterprises or CPSCs or financial institutions will be through infusion of private capital and also through technology and best management practices. So this in turn will contribute to economic growth and new jobs. Now the third objective is to use the disinvestment proceeds or revenues to finance various social sector and developmental programs of the government. Now let us see the features of the policy. See, the policy covers existing central public sector enterprises, then public sector banks and public sector insurance companies. So the policy brings public sector banks and insurance entities into the ambit of disinvestment for the first time. Then under the policy, various sectors will be classified as strategic and non-strategic sectors. We already saw what are the strategic sectors. Now in the strategic sectors, there will be bare minimum presence of the public sector enterprises. Further, the remaining central public sector enterprises in the strategic sector will be either privatized or merged or even subsidized with other CPSCs, or they may even be closed. But in case of the non-strategic sectors, the central public sector enterprises will be either privatized or they will be closed. See, on 2nd February 2021, we have already discussed in detail about disinvestment and privatization. So friends, have a look at that analysis for better understanding of these terms. Now what are the significance of this move? First, it shows that the current government is sticking to its original plan. As you know, the government has a policy of minimum government and maximum governance. Further, in 2014, our Prime Minister announced that the government has no business to be in business. So these expressions already hinted on large-scale disinvestment plans, especially privatizing large portion of the public sector, which is now being carried out. Secondly, this policy is better than the government's previous approach to disinvestment. See, initially the government carried out a piecemeal approach. Here piecemeal means something that is not done according to a plan, but done at different times in different ways. And piecemeal approach means doing something in separate stages rather than being planned and done as a whole. So previously, the disinvestments were case by case sale and were gradually done, usually at irregular intervals. And they were also done in an unsatisfactory manner. For example, few public sector enterprises were merged with other PSCs in the first tenure of the current government. And in government's second and current tenure, we could see a major push to completely sell Air India. And on the other hand, already the disinvestment procedures have been started for Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited or BPCL. So we can say that there was no fixed plan. But positively, the new policy lays down a rationale or logic for deciding the future ownership pattern of central public sector enterprises. For example, it is now clear that 151 public sector firms in non-strategic sectors will either be closed or privatized or sold. The third reason is that when we see the previous governments, they limited their disinvestments to non-strategic sectors. For example, in 2000, as part of the disinvestment program, the Government of India sold Modern Food Industries India Limited to Hindustan Liver Limited. But in the new policy, the government has stressed that even strategic sectors will have a bare minimum presence of government-owned firms. Now, what is the process behind selecting CPSCs for disinvestment? Here we should know that first, the Niti Aayog will suggest the public sector firms in strategic sectors to be retained or privatized or merged or subsidized or simply closed. then this suggestion will be considered by a core group of secretaries on disinvestment and a ministerial group. Then the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management or DIPAM will move a proposal to the Cabinet Committee of Economic Affairs. And the Cabinet Committee of Economic Affairs will finally provide an in-principle approval to sell specific CPSEs. Now we should know that while selecting the public sector enterprises, these firms are excluded from the disinvestment policy, and they include the firms which are engaged in activities allied to farm sector or firms involved in procurement, that is the firms involved in procurement and distribution of food for the public distribution. Then the departments with commercial operations like railways and posts, then firms making appliances for the physically challenged. Also the firms providing support to the vulnerable groups through financing of SCs, STs, minorities and backward classes. And finally, the central public sector enterprises maintaining a critical data having a bearing on the national security, security printing and minting companies. Now what will be the outcome of this policy? Firstly, the government might conclude the sale of Air India, then BPCL and some other entities where some progress has already been made over the past years. Secondly, it will bring in revenue to the government, and in this regard the government has estimated about 1,75,000 crore rupees as receipts from disinvestment for the financial year 2021-22. Now what are the risks associated with this disinvestment policy? See, the first risk is due to the existing turmoil or uncertainty in the global economy. The author fears that this could impact the valuations of the firms that are being privatized, because many potential investors may not decide to bid in the current economic situation. So overall, the revenue expected could be affected. Further, there is always a risk of irregularities in the sales. So this invites the issue of prospective post-deal scrutiny by the auditing agencies and investigating agencies like the Comptroller and Auditor General of India and the CBI. So this scrutiny fear can further dampen the bidding process, the bidding spirit of the investors, and they may not invest. Secondly, the disinvestment could affect any fresh investments. See, since the world economy is in a mode of recession, investors may only buy the existing capacities and they may not venture into making fresh investments. So a reduced fresh investment will in turn affect the economic recovery. So now the government has to act keeping these risks in mind without affecting the economic recovery of the country. Now we have come to the end of the discussion. During our discussion, we have seen the features, significance and the risks associated with the new disinvestment policy of Government of India. So with this information, let us move on to the next news. Now this article talks about water, sanitation and hygiene services. See, as we aim to progress towards a quality healthcare, our government shall prioritize increased access to inclusive and sustainable water, sanitation and hygiene services, or simply WASH services in our healthcare facilities. As we know, clean water, decent toilets and good hygiene helps to control and prevent diseases and also their spread. So in this context, let us discuss this article which speaks about the importance of WASH. The syllabus relevant for this analysis is highlighted here for your reference. Please go through it. See, in 2019, a report by the World Health Organization and UNICEF showed that globally 25% of the healthcare facilities lacked basic water servicing and 20% had no sanitation services and 42% had no hygiene facilities. One of the reasons for this is the huge cost involved in establishing and maintaining the WASH infrastructure. But we must understand that water, sanitation and hygiene services, though seem simple, can make huge impacts in our lives. Now it should be noted that as per the World Health Organization, 8,27,000 people in low and middle income countries die as a result of inadequate water, sanitation and hygiene each year. Also, the death of 2,97,000 children under the age of 5 years can be prevented each year if better WASH could be provided. Coming back to the cost involved, is investment in improving WASH worthy enough? See here, an estimate made by the World Health Organization in 2012 says that for every dollar which was invested in sanitation, there was $5.5 to be gained in lower health costs, more productivity and fewer premature deaths. Not just that, ensuring the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all is the sixth goal of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A recent study shows that improving the WASH across the public health facilities in India and maintaining this for a year is a costly affair. It would cost around $354 million or 2,567 crore rupees in capital costs and $289 million or 2,095 crores in Indian rupees in recurrent expenses. Know that inadequate WASH facilities and lack of infection prevention and control can lead to healthcare associated infections. For example, pathogens such as Salmonella typhi and Streptococcus pneumoniae, etc., are associated with the healthcare associated infections. And this is due to their ability to develop resistance to antibiotics. So improving the wash facilities will also help us to fight against the spread of antimicrobial resistance. Our country, India, is the second most populous country in the world, and almost 60% of the population lives in the urban areas. The urban population is increasing rapidly, putting stress on water and sanitation services. And because of limited access to functioning and safe toilets, and due to open defecation and contamination of water, India had a huge number of diarrhea-related deaths in children under 5 years of age. So apart from the great initiatives like the Swachh Bharat Mission, the authorities shall stress on creating awareness and enough infrastructure for wash services. So all these prove the cost effectiveness of wash interventions across the Indian healthcare system. And according to the author, what we need is a concerted effort from local bodies, state and central governments to sustainably address the quality and inequality issues in wash provisions. We must strive to address these gaps by ensuring wash services across the Indian healthcare system and by making it affordable to the poor. The policymakers shall focus on integrating the overlapping issues of antimicrobial resistance, infection prevention and control, and also the wash services so that we can ensure cost effectiveness and efficient outcomes. So this is all about this news article. With this information, let us move on to the next news. Now see this FAQ column which is with reference to land titling in India. In 2020, the Niti Aayog proposed a model bill on conclusive land titling, and it was sent to states and union territories seeking their comments. So before we understand what are the new changes the government is proposing, let's try to understand how the current system works. The syllabus relevant for this analysis is highlighted here for your reference. Please go through it. See, India currently follows a system of presumptive land titling, which means the land records are maintained with information on possession which is determined through the details of past transactions. So here we are presuming ownership based on land transactions, and based on the current possession, the ownership is established. And whenever we buy or sell a land, we register it. And remember, here we are not registering the land, but in fact it is the registration of transactions such as sale deeds, records of inheritance, mortgage, and also lease. So holding such registration papers or documents does not actually involve the government or the legal framework guaranteeing the ownership title of the land. So this is how the current system works, where the government has minimal role in establishing the ownership of the land, except registering the sale or lease transactions. But on the other hand, under a conclusive land titling system, that is the new system, the land records designate actual ownership. And here, the title is granted by the government, which takes the responsibility for accuracy. And once the title is granted, any other claimant will have to settle the disputes with the government and not the title holder. Further, under the new system, it is the government which will provide the compensation to the claimants in case of disputes. But the title holder is not in any danger of losing the ownership. So this is the new system. Now why this new system called conclusive land titling is needed? See, the main advantage of this system is that a conclusive system will drastically reduce litigations which are related to land. See, when we talk about litigations, according to a 2007 World Bank study, land-related disputes accounted for 2/3 of all pending court cases in India. And according to a Niti Aayog study, disputes on land or real estate take an average time of 20 years in the court to be resolved. So with the new system, the litigations will drastically reduce. Not just that, the other benefit which is associated with the new system is that once conclusive land titling is in place, investors who want to purchase land for business activities will be able to do so without facing the constant risk that the ownership may be questioned or their entire investment may go to waste. Moreover, land disputes and unclear titling also create hurdles for infrastructure development and housing construction, which lead to costly delays and inefficiency. See, if there are too many land litigations, then the investors will worry to invest in the country. So by providing conclusive titles, it promotes active land market in the country where buying and selling of land can easily take place. Further, in cities, the urban local bodies depend on property taxes that can be levied properly only if there is a clear ownership data available. In addition, the ambiguity in ownership of land also results in a black market for land transactions, and this will deprive the government of taxes. Now coming to rural areas, the need for a conclusive land titling is even more acute. See, the access to agricultural credit is very much dependent on the ability to use land as collateral. So with no proper land titles, the access to formal credit becomes very difficult for farmers. And without access to the formal credit system, like from the banks, small and marginal farmers will be left at the mercy of unscrupulous moneylenders. And this will entrench them in a mountain of debt. So what does this model bill propose? See, the bill was released by the Niti Aayog and it proposes setting up of land authorities in each state by the respective state governments. And the state governments will appoint a title registration officer or TRO. And TRO will prepare and publish a draft list of land titles based on the existing records and documents. And this will be considered a valid notice to all potential claimants who are interested in property, who will have to file their claims or objections within a set period. If disputing claims are received, the TRO will verify all the relevant documents and refer the case to a land dispute resolution officer for resolution. But if the dispute is already pending in a court, they cannot be resolved in this way. And after considering and resolving all the disputed claims, the land authority will publish a record of titles. Over a 3-year period, these titles and the decision of the TRO as well as the LDRO or Land Dispute Resolution Officer can be challenged before the Land Titling Appellate Tribunals. See, Land Titling Appellate Tribunals will be set up under this law, and after a 3-year period, entries in the record of title will be considered as conclusive proof of ownership. Now, it is to be noted that further appeals can only be taken up in high courts. So, this is what the model bill of Niti Aayog proposes. But what are the difficulties in providing conclusive land titles? See, the biggest challenge is that land records have not been updated for decades. And this is especially in the case of rural and semi-urban areas. And the land records are often in the name of the grandparents of the current owner with no proof of inheritance. And unless they are based on updated records, conclusive land titles could create even more problems. So, comprehensive village level surveys with community involvement are a necessary precursor to the land titling process. And this is because relying on the current records or even satellite imagery will not provide the same accuracy as actual on-the-ground local surveys. But the problem here is that the local governments are not provided with the resources or manpower to conduct such surveys. And if the surveys are not conducted, the burden to prove falls on the village claimants. And many of them have no access to documentation to proactively challenge the titling during this 3-year period. So only after conducting proper ground level surveys with community involvement, conclusive land titles can prove beneficial. So this is all about the model bill on conclusive land titling. With this information, let us move on to the next news. Now have a look at this question. It is based on this news article which talks about the opinion of Azim Premji, who was the former chairman of Wipro Limited, about the corporate social responsibility or CSR. He said that companies should not be legally mandated to engage in CSR activities because contributions to society should come from within and it should not be done through force. So in this context, let us discuss in detail about corporate social responsibility or CSR. See, CSR is structured around the belief that businesses have a sense of responsibility towards the society and the people from whom they derive their success. And according to some sources, India was the first country in the world to impose a statutory obligation of corporate social responsibility for corporations meeting certain criteria. Now that CSR is mentioned in Section 135 of the Companies Act of 2013, CSR provisions are applicable to every company having a net worth of 500 crore rupees or more, or a turnover of 1000 crore rupees or more, or a net profit of 5 crore rupees or more during any financial year. Such companies shall constitute a corporate social responsibility committee which consists of 3 or more directors, out of which at least one director shall be an independent director. The Act mandates such companies to spend at least 2% of the average net profits of the company made during the 3 immediately preceding financial years on CSR. See, the government of India has made it clear that CSR spending is not a charity or mere donations without any strategic benefits. In fact, there has been a concerted effort in order to define the broad areas under which the fundings can be channeled, thereby visibly and positively impacting the society. So these areas are given in the Schedule 7 of the Companies Act, and they include eradicating extreme hunger and poverty, promotion of education, promoting gender equality and empowering women, then reducing child mortality and improving maternal health, etc. The complete list under Schedule 7 is given here for your reference. Please go through it. And it is to be noted that the CSR legislation is aligned with India's commitment to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Sources say that around 71,277 crore rupees have been spent on more than 1 lakh CSR projects till the financial year 2019. The top 3 domains receiving the maximum funding are education, health and rural development. Now another area receiving significant funding is environmental sustainability. But another interesting trend is that significant amounts of CSR funding goes to higher industrialized states such as Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. So the concentration of spending in these states means the states such as Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, which account for more than 55% of the aspirational districts, that is, states with poor socioeconomic indicators, receive only 9% of the total expenditure towards CSR. So this is in short about corporate social responsibility. Now with this information, have a look at this question. Consider the following: eradicating extreme hunger and poverty, promoting gender equality and empowering women, combating human immunodeficiency virus, then social business projects. In which of the above activities can corporates, under the Companies Act of 2013, focus as a part of their corporate social responsibility policies? See here, all of them are correct. So the correct answer for this question is option D, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now let us move on to the next news. Now have a look at this second question. It is based on this news article which mentions that at a Niti Aayog meeting, our Prime Minister has stressed the need to enhance the ease of living of the citizens of our nation. For this, he asked all the states to work towards reducing the compliance requirement burden for the citizens. And reducing compliance burden requires better coordination between the center and the states. Additionally, he stressed to promote the ease of doing business so as to position India to gain opportunities globally. So in this context, let us have a brief understanding about Niti Aayog. Know that NITI stands for National Institution for Transforming India, and it was formed by a cabinet resolution in 2015, and it replaced the erstwhile Planning Commission. Now that it is one of the youngest institutions of Indian democracy, Niti Aayog is the premier policy think tank of Government of India that provides directional and policy inputs. So it designs strategic and long-term policies and programs for the government, and additionally it also provides relevant technical advice to the center, states and union territories. Further, it is mandated to foster something called as cooperative federalism, and this is to evolve a national consensus on development goals, to redefine the reforms agenda, to act as a platform for resolution of cross-sectoral issues between center and state governments, then capacity building, and finally to act as a knowledge and innovation hub. So Niti Aayog's entire scope of activities can be divided into 4 main heads, and they are design policy and program framework, foster cooperative federalism, then monitoring and evaluation, and finally think tank and knowledge and innovation hub. Know that the Prime Minister of India is the chairperson of Niti Aayog. The Minister of Defense, Minister of Home Affairs and Minister of Finance are the ex-officio members of the Niti Aayog. It also has a governing council. The governing council is the premier or principal body which has been tasked with the work of evolving a shared vision with the active involvement of states. Now know that the governing council is chaired by the Prime Minister, and it comprises of the chief ministers of all the states and the lieutenant governors of union territories. Now from exam perspective, we'll see many indices which are released by the Niti Aayog. See, it includes the SDG India Index, India Innovation Index, School Education Quality Index, Composite Water Management Index, State Health Index, District Hospital Index and State Energy Index, etc. So this is in brief about Niti Aayog. Now with this information, have a look at this question. With reference to Niti Aayog, which of the following statements is or are correct? It is a 3 statements based question. The first statement reads, the National Institute of Labour Economics Research and Development is a central autonomous organization attached to Niti Aayog. Yes, this statement is correct. The Government of India established the National Institute of Labour Economics Research and Development, that is NILERD, in 1962. And it is a central autonomous organization attached to Niti Aayog. The primary objectives of this institution include research and data collection in relation to all major aspects of development, then education and training in all aspects of human capital planning, human resource development, and also monitoring and evaluation. Now the second statement reads, it is mandated to foster cooperative federalism. Yes, this statement is also correct. Now the third statement reads, it releases the School Education Quality Index. Yes, this statement is correct. The School Education Quality Index was developed to evaluate the performance of states and union territories in school education sector. The index aims to bring an outcomes focus to education policy by providing states and union territories with a platform to identify their strengths and weaknesses and also to undertake requisite course corrections or policy interventions. The index strives to facilitate the sharing of knowledge and the best practices across the states and union territories. The index also aims to drive policy reforms that will improve the quality of school education. It also seeks to institutionalize a focus on enhancing education outcomes by driving improvements in learning levels, access, equity, infrastructure, and governance processes. So this is about School Education Quality Index. So coming back to the question, we have seen that all the three statements are correct and we have to identify the correct statement or statements. So the correct answer for this question is option A, all of the above. So with this, we have analyzed almost all the relevant news articles from today's The Hindu newspaper. Now let us move on to the practice questions discussion section based on today's news analysis. See, here we have two mains questions. Please write your answers and post it in the comment section. Now we have come to the end of analysis of all the news articles taken up for today's discussion and also the discussion of practice questions. If you like this video, please press the like button, comment, share, and do subscribe to Shankar IAS Academy YouTube channel for more videos and updates related to civil service preparation. Thank you.